Let's not beat around the bush. The Timeless Child is the single worst idea in Doctor Who history. You might find this hyperbolic, you might disagree, and that's fine honestly, but that is genuinely how I feel about what happened in the finale to Series 12. And really, it's got nothing to do with canon or lore or the notion of rules. My problem with the Timeless Child concept is centred entirely around character. Let me explain why. Quick recap, so in the most recent series of Doctor Who we were repeatedly told that everything you knew was going to change. Again. And we all knew that it had something to do with the mysterious Timeless Child. In Fugitive of the Judoon, bog-standard human being Ruth turned out to be an incarnation of the Doctor who our current Doctor, Jodie Whittaker's 13, couldn't remember. As it turned out, the Ruth Doctor couldn't remember 13 either, leading us to question who came first, whether or not Ruth was who she said she was, and how it would be explained. The Master had also been knocking about in Series 12, and he had a big secret to drop on 13.
Because everything is about to change.
Something allegedly so massive, so anger-inducing for the Renegade Time Lords that he burned Gallifrey to the ground. Wow. What could he have possibly learned? Well, as it turns out, the Timeless Child was a being found below an extra-dimensional portal by Shibogan explorer Tecteun. Tecteun took this child back to Gallifrey, discovered she possessed the power of regeneration, the first time it was ever witnessed in Gallifreyan history, and then proceeded to perform cruel experiments on said child in an attempt to crack the secret of this superpower. After forcing the child to regenerate several times over, Tecteun cracked it. She then bequeathed this power to the rest of Gallifrey, and it ended up being the trick shot that propelled them into being the incredibly powerful beings they're known as in Doctor Who lore. So not only is the child the entire reason for Gallifrey's prosperous, if blood-soaked history, she is also the only true source of the ability known as regeneration. This Timeless Child is a god. And
The child is you.
Yep. It turns out the Doctor herself was the Timeless Child all along. She doesn't just possess the ability to regenerate, she essentially is regeneration. And it turns out her parents weren't just filthy drunk traders who sold her off for drinking money, they chose to be nobodies. Wait, wrong franchise retcon. Never mind. Right off the bat, this just screws over a hideous amount of pre-established storylines and conflicts that have previously dominated the Doctor's life. River Song gave up all her remaining regenerations to save the 11th Doctor, a decision that meant she herself could not regenerate to save her own life when the time came. Turns out the Doctor could have totally channeled the equivalent amount of energy since they possess it infinitely. The time of the Doctor sees the 11th Doctor forced to contend with the fact that he has now run out of regenerations and can only die.
This is where I end up. This face. This version of me.
Until the Time Lords gave him an undisclosed amount of new regenerations at the denouement of the story. You know, those same Time Lords that allegedly knew all about the Timeless Child and the fact that she's ground zero for regeneration, meaning there is no danger of the Doctor dying in the story at all. I could go on. And all that stuff is annoying, it's really annoying, and it's inconsistent, it doesn't make any sense, sure. But it's not like Doctor Who's continuity isn't a gigantic rubber band made up of lots of little rubber bands bandying about burning rubber.
You said that sentence got away from you?
It got away from me, yeah.
What I'm trying to say is that Doctor Who is rife with inconsistencies. Sometimes you have to go with the flow.
I'm half human. On my mother's side.
That's not why this shocking twist reveal is so monumentally stupid. No. About 6 years ago, everyone was annoyed that the moon turned out to be an egg, and they tore their hair out and lauded it as one of the worst ideas in the show's history. But for me, this pales in comparison to the Timeless Child. Sure, the moon being an egg might be nonsensical or frustrating, or even downright silly, but it doesn't change the fundamental nature of the show, that the Doctor is just a traveller, a lonely wandering alien who helps to heal the universe whenever something is wrong, and they happen to be around to stop it.
When people need help, I never refuse.
They became a legend through the person they were, not from where they came from. This is the central, key component of who and what this character is.
God knows it's not because it's easy. It's not even because it works, because it hardly ever does. I do what I do because it's right! Because it's decent!
But the Series 12 finale posits that everything you know is a lie. Ooh, because in fact the Doctor was special right from the word go. They didn't become special through their good deeds, they were actually this incredible, extraordinary being that fell out of the sky and was captured by the would-be Time Lords. Her origins unknown. It rests on that age-old idea that storytelling isn't enough. It's not enough to have characters challenged, to have obstacles thrown at them that provide interesting conflict. They need to have truths revealed to them. They need to find out their larger-than-life origins to reinsert themselves back into their narratives as the chosen ones, the ones who were always special, born to be special, and destined to be on this path that would have surely happened even if they didn't do a damn thing about it. The idea that the Doctor is the timeless child is frustrating because it changes everything but also nothing at the same time. It changes nothing about her opinions on the Time Lords, the ones behind it. The Doctor has always disagreed with the values and pompous pretense begot by the Time Lords and has decried their methods as unethical and wrong in the past. In the episode, we find out the Gallifreyans tortured and controlled the Doctor, so now the Doctor still has cause to disagree with the values of Time Lords and find their methods unethical? She already thought that. What interesting new dimension does this bring to the narrative? How does knowing this change the Doctor's values? What does it provide other than a cheap, empty gasp from the audience? I've seen defenders of the Timeless Child say that it doesn't take anything away from the character of the Doctor, it only adds to her, but I disagree completely. The Doctor has been altered from someone who chooses to be special through their actions into being special by birthright. By their very existence, they are the hero of this story. There seems to be an obsession with taking protagonists in stories and revealing that, contrary to what you knew, they were always destined to be special, they were always greater than, they were always larger than life. In Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies, Peter Parker just so happens to be bitten by a radioactive spider. There's nothing special about him, per se, the spider didn't choose him, and even after he gains some mastery over his powers, there's still nothing special about him.
Jesus, Parker, you are a freak.
He uses it to try and buy a car to impress a girl he likes. It is only when he chooses to do good things with his gifts that he becomes special. He lives his life to a standard that is heroic, that is commendable, and it is what he does, rather than where he came from, that makes him this paragon of righteousness. It is that that makes us love him as a character.
Who am I? I'm Spider-Man.
Then take Mark Webb's Spider-Man movies. Peter is randomly bitten by the spider, yes, but it turns out his father was responsible for the spider DNA bullshit at Oscorp and specifically used his blood to make it all work.
The human DNA that I implanted in the spiders was my own.
Meaning only Peter could have become Spider-Man. So from birth, he was destined to be special no matter what he did. The Timeless Child concept does the exact same bullshit. The Doctor was like any other Time Lord until one day they decided enough was enough. They didn't agree with Gallifreyan aristocracy and they wanted to venture forth into the stars, find themselves. So they stole a TARDIS and ran away. What made the Doctor special? Their adventures. All the times they took the right path, helped people, when they were kind and truthful and selfless. That's all you need to make the Doctor the incredible, enduring character that they are. You don't need to change everything we think we know again and turn them into this mysterious being that came through a portal from another dimension. You don't need to make them ground zero for regeneration. You don't need to make them infinitely older than what we thought or have infinitely more faces than what we thought. It doesn't pose any interesting story questions. It doesn't change what we knew about the Doctor as a person. All it does is change her circumstances and takes away her free will. It takes away her choices as William Hartnell's first Doctor. This sucks. And what message does it provide to audiences, particularly young people who grow up inspired by characters like the Doctor or Spider-Man? Sorry kids, you might come from very little and look to someone heroic in the stories you love and you might think, I could be like them if I'm brave enough and do right by those around me and work hard, but you were wrong. You were dead wrong. Sorry, you needed to be born special. You needed to be unique from the very start, extraordinary in every measure. There should have been a plan for you, orchestrated by others so that you could be pulled along your journey. It's not for you to take control of and make for yourself. That's a great big bunch of bullshit.
It's not who I am underneath, but what I do at
defines me.
I've seen a lot of people argue that this finale successfully ties together a few loose ends from the series, specifically the previous incarnations of the Doctor seen in the brain of Morbius, but really this feels like Chibnall's half-assed attempts to resurrect the oft-touted Cartmel master plan, a story arc for the Doctor envisioned by script editor Andrew Cartmel, which was intended to develop across the 7th Doctor's tenure, but was ultimately cut short after the show was cancelled. The idea was originally intended to reveal that the Doctor was in fact a reincarnation of the Other, a Gallifreyan demigod who was present at the founding of Gallifrey alongside Rassilon and Omega. Whilst there are some obvious differences between this and the Timeless Child, the bare bones of it, the Doctor being more than just your average Time Lord, remain the same. The issue here is that the Cartmel master plan was ultimately envisioned as a means to add more mystery to the character of the Doctor, but in many ways it strips them of that mystery. The same problem is present here. I don't understand why you would want to go back to this during a time when the show was cancelled. On a side note, I find it interesting that a man who once went as far as to go on television to complain about Doctor Who in the 1980s has decided that what the show really needed to do was return to the direction it was going to in the 1980s. And look, I'm all for adding a bit of mystery to the Doctor, but it needs to feed into something. It needs to provide material for the narrative to chew on. Compare this huge canon-altering addition to another huge canon-altering addition in New Who's run, The Time War. When Russell T Davies brought the show back in 2005, the big key change that marks New Who in stark contrast to its predecessor show is of course this very concept above all else. When we met the Doctor again, he was suddenly the last of his kind, a survivor of a great war that saw the Time Lords and the Daleks wiped out by his own hand. It meant that he now carried with him significant baggage, PTSD...
They're never gonna come! Your race is dead! You lie! I watched it happen. I made it happen!
...and an irrevocably different outlook on life in the universe.
I'm not just a Time Lord. I'm the last of the Time Lords.
What RTD did was breathe new life into the show by positing that new, exciting story changes had occurred in the time in which we hadn't seen the Doctor. He didn't take the Doctor's origins and mess with them to make the character more interesting, he threw conflict at the character to make them more interesting.
We're the only two left. There's no one else. Regenerate!
He understood that story is about the now, what's happening to these characters in the present moment that drives our story. It's not about filling in blanks from the past that frankly don't need filling in. The Timeless Child concept instead goes for a cheap shock in lieu of opening up the storytelling possibilities. The Doctor reassures herself, and us, that she's still the Doctor after finding out she was the Timeless Child. Just in case you thought this show had any gumption, it drops its shocking revelations only if the lead character tells us that everything is going to remain the same. And sure, Whittaker's Doctor might say she's still the same person, but really, she is now a literal god. Rather than being a legendary mythic figure across time and space because she saved lives and continues to do so and inspire others, she's a legendary mythic figure because she has the unique power of regeneration, a power that only naturally occurs in her and belongs to her truly, no one else. Why does regeneration need to be specifically the Doctor's power? What dimension does it bring to the concept of regeneration itself? What's even more frustrating is there's elements of this idea that I like, that I really, really like, if we remove the fact that the Doctor is the Timeless Child from the equation, of course. Namely, I love the idea that the Time Lords found a helpless creature in the cosmos, a creature that they discovered could not die, and rather than caring for it and showing it love and compassion, they imprisoned it and tortured it until they stole its power. We learn that the Time Lords have absolutely zero right to use this power, including the characters we know like the Doctor and the Master. It adds a colonial tinge to the already upper class, snooty characterisation of the Time Lords, and does it not pose an interesting question for the Doctor? She's regenerated time and time again, she's had the privilege of extending her life long beyond its natural limits. Today, she's discovered that this power wasn't in fact her birthright, as every Time Lord thought it was before her. It wasn't biologically theirs, nor did their best scientists create it and bestow it upon their race. They stole it. They used pain to extract it and copy it. So now, with that information in mind, if the time came to regenerate again, would she? Should she? Is she not endorsing the diabolical schemes of her Gallifreyan ancestors by continuing to regenerate? To regenerate now with that sinister knowledge means something markedly different. Truly, everything she knew was a lie, and it creates questions in the narrative. Are we guilty of the decisions our parents make? By continuing to enjoy the spoils given to us that were born out of blood, are we just as bad as the ones that came before us? By going along with the system, are we just as responsible for its ills? And then maybe she decides that the only way to make this okay is to find the timeless child and put it all right. Console them, do their best to fix them, help them. You know, what the Doctor has always done. Whatever it is that the Doctor could do to repair the pain her race has caused this creature. And maybe, just maybe, the timeless child might see all the good in the universe that the Doctor is responsible for and tell them that they're happy for them to continue to have their power. And here's another permutation on this idea that I like a little less because it once again alters the Doctor's origins, but at least it would challenge her as a character. What if she discovered that Hartnell's Doctor was the scientist who extracted regeneration from the timeless child? What if it was actually the Doctor herself who tortured this being into giving her what she and the rest of her race wanted? What if she was directly responsible for this terrible thing, and that she either chose to forget this information or buried it deep due to the trauma of witnessing it all and of bearing that shame? She didn't steal a TARDIS and run away because she was bored of Gallifrey, she ran away because she was ashamed of what she had done. All season, the companions have been learning that the Doctor isn't this clear-cut figure of moral good all the time. She can be arrogant, deadly, and manipulative. So wouldn't it take the Doctor-companion relationship to an interesting place in Series 13 if they had found that out? Wouldn't it set the stage for an incredible redemptive arc for the Doctor? What if she learnt this horrible truth, that she had been the one who had tortured this child, and decided she needs to find the timeless child and save them? She chose to take the name the Doctor all those years ago, and she chose to help the universe for all this time. But now, she's realising that it isn't necessarily good enough, that she needs to pay the price for hurting that one soul for whom she destroyed all that time ago. The concept could be interesting, but it needs to challenge the Doctor. Having her just find out that she's the centre of this story, the centre of the Time Lord's universe, isn't interesting. It's the opposite. Maybe what I've just suggested isn't quite right either, but you get my point, right? The reveal needed to set up the narrative going forward, not backwards. It needed to test the Doctor and her companions. All she learns is that she was a victim to aristocrats she already hated, more special than she already was after all of her actions that have defined her in the past anyway. Also, just to quickly switch gears ever so slightly and talk about the Master. Again, there was something interesting in the Master discovering something that appalled him, something so disgusting that even by his abhorrent moral code, it was too much. Wouldn't it have been more interesting to have him dig into the archives, see what was done to the timeless child, and feel empathy? Wouldn't it have been a true switch up for the show, for the Master to give the Doctor this information, for the Doctor to condemn her race, and for the Master to say, I agree with you. Simultaneously, I don't think he'd bat an eye at regenerating, so both characters could have conjured an interesting debate on the subject. If the aforementioned Doctor stance is that regeneration is wrong because they don't deserve to have it, because they stole it, shouldn't the Master's self-serving mantra dictate that he thinks it's all absolutely fine, and that in spite of how it came to be, it is now rightfully their power? The worst part about all of this is that, for the most part, you know, I quite liked Series 12. It was by no means a perfect season of Doctor Who, but I found myself surprised at its relative quality. It was a step in the right direction after Whittaker's first stale series. It felt like Chibnall and the team had tried to directly rectify that season's problems, a darkness had been restored to the character of the Doctor, it played with interesting one-off concepts, there was an overarching story at play, we got legitimate villains instead of Tim Shaw and that f***ing bull. But if you've been listening to our podcast, the Full Fat Podcast, you'll know that despite our goodwill, Chris and I knew the finale would make or break this series of Doctor Who.
My worry is that if everything that it sets up goes to would I watch it again? Probably not, because I'm watching it with a view of, well, that never came to anything. Well, that was disappointing.
I agree. I think the series as a whole, I think it's a good time to talk about the series as a whole, because this is pushing the whole arc forward, has been way better than I could have anticipated, but some of the reveals which happen in this episode could easily go to pot. Unfortunately, we got the latter. I'm just a bit fed up with this run of the show now, in all honesty. Everything Chibnall does feels reactionary. He might claim he doesn't read reviews, but after we all complained that Series 11 was empty and devoid of real risks, he flipped the switch the other way and stuffed Series 12 full of surprises. Everything you knew would change again and again and again. But for what? I wouldn't be surprised if Series 13 doesn't mention the Timeless Child at all, if we don't see the Master and his Cybermasters at all. And really, after 2 series of the Chibnall era, shouldn't I have some sense of where it's going? Shouldn't I have a reason to give a shit?
Thank you for watching another full fat video. Don't forget to click that subscribe button if you'd like to see more of our deep dives into reality TV. Also, huge thanks to all of our patrons, especially Dr. Chike, Jax Merrick and Mike Nandu. You're all amazing. Until next time, stay